Hey guys, I'm back with Ben and Glenn for another podcast and video podcast. We're going to do today's on running. They also do a running course along with the hip course, which was on a recent podcast, so if you haven't seen that, go and check that out. The running course they do, we've talked about before a few years ago, so it'd be interesting to have another chat today and see where they are really. So thank you for being on the podcast again.
Yeah, thanks again.
So I guess if we kind of crack on, so what I think firstly, just to sort of set the scene really, what are the common kind of running injuries that you encounter sort of in practice and that you cover like during the courses?
Most the population I deal with is recreational runners, sort of starting from anywhere from 5k up to marathon, ultra marathon. So, but majority of about 80 to 90% are overuse injuries. So usually they can't retell a particular incident. They had it for a while, it's become sort of worse and worse. You do get the odd traumatic ones, like a trail runner, sprained their ankle or hit by a bike or something like that. But majority are usually repetitive overuse injuries. And if you look at the stats as well as literature as well as from my clinical practice, I would say the majority, 40 to 50%, is knee related. So your classical patellofemoral pain, your ITB, fat pad impingement, or somebody with a pre-existing knee OA, flare-up of those things. So very rare to see ACL or traumatic type meniscal pathology. The next big one is obviously the tendinopathy group. So looking into your Achilles, gluteal tendinopathy, proximal, so overuse. Again, you see that more in the 40 plus population. We are seeing more and more people in the 40s and 50s because the largest growing segment in running is the 40 plus female group as well. So we're seeing a lot of that. And let's not forget the foot and ankle, plantar fasciitis, your metatarsal pain, all those sort of groups. It's very rare to see a true hip pathology coming from running. Usually running is heavy on your knees and foot and ankle. By the time it comes to your hip and back, it's dissipated. So it's a bit more, we don't really see true hips from there. So majority will be knee and foot and ankle, and obviously your tendinopathy. So those are the big ones which we see and which we also cover on our courses as well.
Okay, cool. And how do you go about screening people when they, with running injuries, and what do you use with that information, or how do you use that information? I guess.
So we've got a nice little system that we do with a runner screen where we look at how they move. First of all, I think that's really important. So the functional movement tests have had a bit of a kind of hard time lately, but I still use them for my runners. I think it gives you a lot of useful information. Obviously, you can't take that information and predict injury risk and things like that, but it can very nicely direct the rest of your assessment and your initial rehab exercises and stuff like that. So I'll look at an overhead squat. I'll look at a good overview of their whole kinetic chain. I'll look at single leg squat. From that, you can see if they've got any apparent weaknesses around the hip, if they're going into valgus, that kind of stuff. I still use a lot of dynamic differentiation tests, and we still use those on our courses as well. So from our three main objective tests, which are functional movement testing, which is your overhead squat, your single leg squat, and hop testing. From that, we can then direct and use one of 7 dynamic differentiation tests to focus more on if we think it's a thoracic mobility issue, for example, or if we think it's a restriction of dorsiflexion. We can then explore that further without having to stop the test. So it kind of takes you away from a lot of static measurements, but obviously part of our screening will still look at certain specific static measurements. So I think you need to have a good way of looking at hip extension. I think you need to be looking at ankle dorsiflexion, great toe extension as well. So there are certain static markers that are really relevant for all runners, and those 3 in particular would be part of my screen. And then you want to look at muscle strength, muscle endurance testing, stuff like that. So there's a variety of ways that you can do that. We're using handheld dynamometers a lot more now, but I'm also a big advocate of getting my runners to self-test. So I'll teach them how in a gym environment they can look at their 10 rep maxes of quads and hamstrings and work out ratios of that, looking at single leg press, looking at what their squat numbers are and things like that. So I'm a big advocate of that as well. So finally then you might choose to look at them run, so running analysis. That for me is the special test of a runner. Putting it all into practice really. If someone's getting pain when they stand up from sitting, you're going to watch that, aren't they? If someone's getting pain when they squat, likewise if someone's getting pain when they run, you're going to have to look at that also.
Yeah, cool. And are there particular themes or common themes that you've picked up over the last 8 years of working with runners?
Yeah, I think the first thing is nearly all of runners who comes to us are with injury. So I think the first thing I would say to any therapist dealing with runners is to understand the jargon. When somebody says like a fartlek training, tempo training. So I think is really understand from where they're coming from, and also what drives them to run. So one of the key questions which I ask my runners is, what do you miss the most when you don't run? So some run for weight loss. Some majority of my patients in the city run purely for stress relief because they work in a very stressful environment. Some run while in a social groups. So I think we need to know what drives them to running, because if we don't understand them, how can we tailor it or do that? So I want to really understand the person behind the runner, because once we can connect them better, and also I'll try to throw in words on the first sessions, thinking like, are you preparing for a marathon? What's your PB? What's your cadence? So immediately the first thing they ask me is, are you a runner? So we want to really create the connection on the first session that you do understand running. So first thing most runners look out for when they deal with therapists is, does this therapist understand running? You don't need to be a runner at all, but you need to understand from where they're coming from, both from a training point of view as well as from a psychological point of view as well. And the themes, that's quite interesting dealing with the runners. This is something which we see a common pattern for all these years. First thing is too much too soon, too fast. Very common. Somebody's running 2 days now, doing 5 days. Somebody who's done 20 miles, doing 40 miles. So you see there's a big leap in their training profile as well. The second thing is people rush back to running after incomplete rehab. They get back with 60% better, 70% better. They don't take them all the way from strength training to plyometrics to return to running. So it's having that phased manner. They go to physio, get the pain under control, and then they're back to the same mileage. So incomplete rehab. The third thing is, sometimes there's nothing wrong with their training or with their rehab. Sometimes it's just a massive change in their lifestyle. So new baby, partner had a baby, or they're just commuting 3 hours each way, or they're just having other stress relief, they're not sleeping. So the key questions I ask them is change their lifestyle. So the top questions I would ask is there any change in your training load, intensity, issues, anything? Usually there's always a trigger, external trigger. And the second thing is, have you had any recent injuries, especially in the last 12 months? And has there been any change in your lifestyle? It's very rare in my experience to find a runner without a problem in one of those three coming with injury. So it's looking at both the internal factors as well as extrinsic factors, because that's usually the combination of those two. And the running injuries are usually multifactorial. We're not going to say like because you got tight ankle you're going to get injured. It's not as simple as that, isn't it? Your training load, looking at the person, and also the lifestyle. So it's more holistic. That's something which we focus more on.
Yeah, and I think one thing I've always noticed is that a lot of runners who come in just run, they don't do any strength stuff. So why do you think this is? Why do you think so many runners don't do strength training? And how would you sort of tailor the strength training to be specific to them so they can actually kind of get on board and do what you're asking them to do?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. I mean, that's actually how I first started getting involved treating runners. So on my background, I'm not a runner. My background is more in gym environment, strength and conditioning, and I started to see in the city a lot of marathon runners that were running for stress relief, and started picking up on a lot of weaknesses that they had in similar areas. A lot of them had, just their general strength wasn't where it should be for the demands that they were placing on their bodies. So I think, it's a good question. Why don't runners do strength and conditioning? I mean, you could flip that, couldn't you, and say why don't guys that lift heavy weights in the gym do a lot of endurance running? I think people do what they like to do and what they enjoy doing. And if you like being outside and running in nature, then you're probably not going to like being stuck in the gym doing lots of weight training. So I think that's the first point, is that we all kind of gravitate towards what we enjoy and try and spend more and more time doing that, rather than perhaps what might facilitate us to be able to do that injury free. So the next part was, how would I tailor that strength training? So first of all, I think highlighting to them the importance of it. So it's not just, I like strength training, I want you to do it. It's informing them of the fact that if they incorporate strength training twice a week into their program in a balanced way, that it's probably going to reduce their injury risk by about 50%. So most runners are very keen to keep running and to do so injury free. So that in itself is a big buy-in normally. How do I make it runner specific? Showing them, this again is where I think the functional movement tests have their value. If you show someone that they're completely unstable on one leg because of weakness, or their hips are dropping because of the hip weakness, then they're much more likely to be compliant with hip strengthening exercises, for example, that you then give them. because they can relate that to their meaningful task, which is running.
Yeah.
I'll make a lot of my strength and conditioning exercises on one leg, single leg work, single leg deadlifts, single leg squats, things like that, so that it is more specific to the task of running, which is a one or no leg activity, isn't it? And if they are really adamant that they don't like gyms and they won't commit to that, then we can tailor it around them, so we can give them kettlebells, and they can spend a bit of money and buy some dumbbells, kettlebells, barbells for home, bands, medicine balls, things like that. So there are ways and means of adapting. I think anyone can do a good strength and conditioning program in a gym or at home. I'm a bit more biased to the gym. I think particularly for strength, there's certain things in the gym that you can't replicate at home. But if you're looking at a marathon runner, which is predominantly what I see, if you wanted to focus more on the endurance side of things, then that can easily be done at home with bands and with all kinds of cheap and easily accessible equipment.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. And what do you find? What do you guys find are the common kind of clinical challenges that physios face when they're dealing with running type injuries?
I think the key thing is we all have a bias. Like we openly say that we are strength and conditioning bias, but when we look at runner, it's understanding the complexity of 3-4 key areas. So one is looking into the training load. So first is understanding that you only get running injuries by running. So you have to take a detailed history there. So how many days are they training? What type of training? Preparing for an event. So a detailed history on the training load is crucial. The second thing is looking at the person. What is their experience? We know that novice runners are around 3 to 4 times high risk of getting injured and then female runners are slightly more to get knee pain. So we need to know the demographics as well. What's their specific impairments? What impairments they have? Their experience? What is the previous injury history? The psychosocial profile? All those sort of things. So looking at the runner as a person. And the third thing is looking at the running mechanics. So looking at are they optimized the cadence, overstride, all those sort of factors there. So I think the difficult part dealing with as most new grad physio is to look in isolation. Just saying, oh, you got weak glutes, so you're getting knee pain. It's not as simple as that. Or you're running too much, you're not getting. I've lost count of many runners who run 6 days, 7 days, don't get injured. How do you explain that? So they don't do any strength and conditioning. So there are always people. So it's looking at the person. So in the courses we put that into these 3 blocks: the training load, looking at the person, both physical as well as psychosocial. The third is looking at their running mechanics. So I think the most hardest thing as a therapist is knowing what is the key contributing factor. Some people, they just run too much, they have to reduce, as simple as that. Giving the best strength and conditioning will not help that. Some people, it's just tailoring a small little, for example, a cadence is not all you need. So it's not in having this recipe doing everybody who works in needs a strength and conditioning program. That was the way I used to treat before. Now we don't do that. So it's knowing which of the 3 is the most significant for the runner sitting in front of you, and then adapting that. I think for a novice or somebody who doesn't understand running, that can be very challenging. And not everybody needs exercise. So some people just tinkering their training volume is all you need. So just somebody with a knee pain who's making the transition from 10k, just reduce them from 4 days to 3 days, slightly increase the cadence, few changes. That's all they needed for reducing the pain. So not everybody needs to be going to the gym and loading them necessarily, but it's knowing which one to push and which one to back off. So I think that's the tricky bit there.
Yeah, definitely. And talking about strength training, are there other kind of what other forms of training do you do with runners apart from strength and conditioning stuff?
So I think there's a few key areas we look at core work. So we tend to do more dynamic core. We're looking at hip mobility is really key. So getting a lot of hip mobility into it, dynamic warm-ups as well. Plyometrics is a huge one. And this is, again, plyometrics, if done well, will increase performance and will reduce injury risk, but it must be one of the more common reasons that people come through my doors when it's not done well. So your typical kind of slightly overweight, and this is where the argument for strength training is key. Really, you can't really go on to plyometrics without a good base of strength. So I see a lot of runners that have read an article in Runner's World or something. Plyometrics will help with your performance. So then they start doing all of these plyometric programs, never done any strength and conditioning in their life, and then they're turning up with tendon problems and joint problems. I'm sure you've seen that as well. Plyometrics we teach on the course. We're big advocates of them. I think they're very useful for a runner, but they have to be done in the right way, and you have to screen for them. And even in my caseload, I've had issues where I've flared people up by bringing plyometrics in when I thought it was okay to do so, but I brought it in too soon. So we take a very cautious approach in screening for that and making sure they're ready to do it. So they're the kind of key areas around the strength and conditioning that we add in.
Cool. And you mentioned their flare up. So when you've got people who are, say, have been flared up or acute, have acute pain, maybe they're struggling to load heavy. Is there any other ways that you guys use, or any things you do to sort of induce hypertrophy gains or strength gains without heavy loads? That sort of thing?
That's quite a difficult one, especially when you want to get that strength gain. So one of the things which, before I go into that topic, is we always try to encourage our injured runners to cross train. We know there's analgesic effect with aerobic activity, so get them on the pool, get them on the cross trainer, get a bit of buzz from their endorphins, so they feel like they're doing something. Runners want to do something, so you want to really encourage a bit of cross training, upper body workout and things like that. So the most common by far which we see in the clinic is the knee related pain, and this is something which I've done my own personal experience. Multiple surgeries on my knee about 7-8 years ago. I struggled with heavy loads. So post-operatively, I started using occlusion training, blood flow restriction training, and fortunately we got very good evidence with multiple RCTs coming in the last 2-3 years. So it's we got specific protocol which we go on our course, which we use with patellofemoral pain. It can also be used for post-ACL as well, or somebody with an EOA. So the things we use is occlusion training, especially knee specific. We also been playing around with some neuromuscular stimulation as well to get that quad inhibition there. So it's early recruitment, and the best thing about occlusion training is you're going to get the hypertrophic gains with only 20 to 30% of your rep max to get the same benefits with 70%. So but again, there's a lot of precautions, do's and don'ts, what are the pressures, a lot of technical areas which we go through. It's not something you can just put it on anyone and they get a clot or something, then they'll be in trouble. So it's knowing those sort of areas. So again, with an injured runner, you can still do a lot of graded exposure, and we know that there's effects with contralateral training. So if you've got an injured left side, if you do strength training on the right, you're going to get some strength gains as well, neurologically. So there's different ways you can play around. And the big one which we always emphasize, another one is plyometrics in water. So the few studies which have shown that the power gains are similar both on water as well as land. So for patients whom you're a bit wary of introducing plyometrics, we always start in the water and see the response. Usually the response is usually the 24 hours later. They come back with the knee swelling, with the tendon pain, then you know that it's not right. So start with aqua jogging or aqua based plyometrics. See the response and then introduce. So it's knowing those ways where you can work around their injury and the pain levels. So you're still getting some gains, but there's no substitute for land-based training and doing a proper strength and conditioning. So eventually I'll have to get them to do your land-based exercises to get good form and things like that.
And that just that kind of introduces challenges that you might find with strength training, like the pain and stuff. So there are other what are the common challenges you find when you're implementing like an S&C type program with runners?
So I think one of the key problems is volume, just training volume overall. So if you get a keen runner in this that is running 6-7 days a week and they have an overuse injury, then just adding in 2 days of strength training on top of that program isn't going to give them much benefit there. Really, you're just putting more load into an already overloaded program. So one of the key barriers I think is getting them to reduce their volume to incorporate the strength and conditioning, and then you come across a lot of the kind of views of I'm going to get bulky, I'm going to get big, it's going to slow me down, and in actual fact I'm yet to see a runner incorporate an endurance runner incorporate strength and conditioning and put on a noticeable amount of muscle bulk. So it doesn't seem to work that way with endurance running. It doesn't seem to allow that hypertrophy to occur if they're running over a certain mileage per week. So it's getting them to adapt their volume so that they can incorporate it is one thing. Convenience is another thing. A lot of them aren't members of gyms, so that they run because they don't like being cooped up in gyms, so they go outside and run. So it's inconvenient to try and expect them to go and join a gym just specifically to do that. Some will, some will happily do that, particularly if they're not running at that point in time, because then as Ben mentioned, you can get them to not just do strength and conditioning, but they can do a bit of rowing or cross training or swimming in the same facility. But if they're not able to do that, if they don't live there, busy work schedule, etc., then as we mentioned before, getting them to have options at home is the way around that. So they're the two main barriers that we see, is a fear of some kind of negative effect of the strength training, overloaded training program where it's not going to be appropriate to add it in, and a lack of convenience to be able to train in gyms or have the time to do that.
Awesome.
One thing I would add is, as therapists, is to try to keep them running as much as possible.
Yeah.
So there are certain circumstances which we go through, is things like stress fractures, things like that. Then obviously you have to stop them. Most of the runners, I would say 90% of the runners, we try to keep them running. So because runners get that buzz from running, so you can always tinker around. So if somebody says they get pain after 40 minutes of running, keep it 15-20 minutes. So bring it down to 3 days. So it's always finding ways around it, because the patients will be happier, and also they're more likely to engage in that. So one thing which we find a lot of runners complain is, I'm going to go to physio, he's going to ask me to stop running. So we don't want to have that create an image.
Yeah, I mean, well, in actual fact, I get a lot of runners come through my door that have seen several physios beforehand. And that seems to be a standard practice for a lot of people. It's just, okay, you're not running now until we kind of finish treatment, and for people that have invested a lot of time and effort and raised money for charities and stuff, that's not really an option, and if you can facilitate it and recover, and they can recover while still maintaining a bit of running in their program, then that's always optimal. It makes my job much harder if they've stopped running for 2-3 months to then get them back to where they were at beforehand. So it doesn't take very long before all of a sudden then they'll start presenting with new pains and new issues when they start going to return back to their pre-injury activity. You might have solved one problem, and more often than not you haven't even solved that problem, you've just offloaded it, and when they run it comes back. But even if you don't, you're reducing their envelope of function by stopping them running for prolonged periods of time, and then by the time they get back to running, they're more likely to present with other issues as well.
And often they just won't listen to physios if they don't run, and they'll do it anyway. So it's one of those things.
Oh, my outcomes improved exponentially when I started getting much more involved in their program, in their running program. So before, when I first started, I had a strength and conditioning kind of approach, which I still incorporate with most of them, but I didn't really get involved with their running. I was like, okay, you're the runner, you deal with that, I'll deal with this, maybe rest a little bit, very vague advice. Whereas now, particularly with my marathon runners, I'm sort of really involved with their programs, and I normally will set their programs if they're turning up to me injured, and I'll guide them along. That's where my practice has changed dramatically, is linking up with running coaches and things like that as well. So if they're willing to put that extra effort in, then we can work together if they've got specific times in mind. My success rate with treating running injuries went up dramatically when I started taking control of their running, really. And
that's again talking about change of practice. So have you has your practice changed a lot?
So something which is unique, which I've really incorporated, is taking the multiple roles, which Glenn was alluding here. Suppose you are a footballer, come with groin pain, obviously I treat you, give you some high-end rehab, but I'm not going to show you how to kick a ball. I think it's not my area. I won't give you football specific skills. So usually I'll give it to the trainer there. But where it comes interesting with the runners is we take the whole all the areas. So I see my role just not as a rehab therapist, but also as a coach. So I'm massively involved in the training program, the recovery. So I think I look at all facets, because many runners might not have access to a nutritionist, to an assistant coach. So you might be the only person who would be giving them advice on the recovery, the shoes, and all those things. So it's having that all-round view of a runner, not just, okay, I'm just going to show you some exercises, that's it. So that's not where you're going to finish with the runner. You're not going to keep that sort of link there. So looking at the whole package, treat them as if it's your client for a running coach. Obviously, I'm not a running coach. I'm not really having that high level knowledge there. But for an injured runner, I think we can manage really well to get them back into that normal phase. If they want to improve their performance, I'll say it's not my area. Please find a running coach. But most injured patients, we can manage really well. So that holistic view, and also looking into the recovery, is quite undervalued. So looking at the next day, how they're in a muscle soreness. So we use a lot of simple apps we use with the clients to monitor their recovery, because your training should be based. If you want to train like a pro athlete, you should recover like a pro athlete, isn't it? You can't just pick up random programs and be still working 70 hours. It's not possible. So the recovery is hugely important. The last thing is actually gait analysis. So we're quite fortunate we have access to the treadmill here. So nearly all our patients, we like to see them. Not necessarily we're going to make changes there. So I think it's a logical progression there. If you, especially when somebody's getting back after an injury, we always want to see them, and we're giving more emphasis on the running mechanics. So that's, I think, is really changed, and that's also being reflected in our courses as well. is getting a more holistic view rather than just strength and conditioning, which is just not the way to go forward.
Yeah, definitely. And I think we've talked about it, or we've both talked about it a little bit, but gait analysis and how important that is. So I just wondered if you could talk a little bit about that in terms of the importance of not only just the strength and stuff, but also the gait analysis stuff as well.
I mean, you have to be mindful of the drawbacks of gait analysis. You know, when we're looking at someone on a treadmill and they only ever run outside, there's an obvious issue there, isn't there? So does that reflect how they run on the road, you know, when we've got them on the treadmill? But on the same note, I don't have the time to go out with them on the road and film them and all that sort of stuff. So it's the best option available in the clinic to get a look at what they're doing, which is running. You know, so yeah, as I said, if someone was getting pain when they was turning to the right, I would watch them turning to the right and see if there's anything jumping out from there. We can make some assumptions by the way they single leg squat. If they're going into a valgus, they'll probably go into a valgus on the treadmill. We know that's been shown, but until you actually see it, you can't make those assumptions again. And so there's been a few issues around the gait analysis that have been a major player in, I think, our course development, our practice. So I used to do gait analysis 8-9 years ago, and it was a real hassle. You know, to use a camera, then download it on a PC, then go through it, to allow extra half hour on top of an already extended session. Whereas now it's so simple, you can do it with apps that we go through on iPads. You know, it's very quick. So I think it's become much more accessible for everyone. It used to be that you could only really get a look at 2D, you know, like for side and back, or maybe from the front if you wanted to do that. You didn't have any real idea of what impact forces was going through your client. You know, maybe you'd listen to the sound that they were making on the treadmill. Whereas now there's some pretty good kit available that you can that's quite reliable, that you can use in real time again, and you can download it and see actually what's their ground reaction force. What is it on the left? What is it on the right? You know, so we're working with a few companies that are developing that side of things. So it's developing and it's progressing. I don't think it's a passing fad. I think it's it's something that we should all be proficient in doing if we're dealing with runners. We have to be aware of the limitations on the same note as that. You know, but if someone's a runner, you want to watch them run. You get an idea of what they're doing. And they get confidence in you that you know what you're doing. You know? So I think it's a kind of it's a win-win really.
And I think what running biomechanics is a huge area, so you can really get complex with so many areas. But what we emphasize on the course is complex thinking but simple intervention. So when you retrain with your patients, you don't have to really go into all this in depth. You know, so give them simple cues. You know, like for example, like if you want to improve hip extension, like push the track back, or you're squashing an orange. So we use very simple 3-4 words cues, which is more relative to the patient. And generally we use more external cues rather than thinking about the pelvis and hips and things like that. Something they can listen to or something like that. So it's simplifying biomechanics and making it accessible to the patient. Because you can really get bogged down to all the sort of vector forces and things like that, which is not really important, isn't it?
I think that's the only way that clinically it's going to translate into their running, isn't it? If you're having to concentrate and think, then you're not going to be able to incorporate a cue. I think that's a really important point. The cues need to be simple, and you know, we've discussed quite a lot here today, but again it's layered, isn't it? It's like when I first started, I got lots of success with my runners just by incorporating a good strength and conditioning program, which most of them have never done. Then you realise that that's not the be all and end all. That's an important part of a program that most runners are missing. Then I started looking more at the volume. Oh, okay, these guys are running 7 days a week, these guys are running 3 days a week, the ones running 7 seem to be getting injured more. And then the evidence supports that. You know, if you don't have your 2 rest days a week, then your injury rate is significantly more. So, you know, when you're starting out looking at runners, if it's something you're new to, just by getting them to run 3 days a week and 2 days strength and conditioning, it's going to have a positive effect for most of your amateur runners. You know, I saw my success rate. I always audit my marathon runners, how many actually come on the books and how many finish, and just that was the biggest spike that I've seen in improvement there, just managing volume. Now the issue there is then if they want to get a sub 3 hour marathon or something, if they're a bit more advanced, they're not going to do that with that program, so that's when you need to incorporate the help of coaches or take a bit more of an involved role yourself. But I think, you know, there's lots of simple changes you can make, and as Ben said, when you start looking at a running, very simple cues, looking at their cadence, things that you can quite easily change with external cues. It doesn't have to be overly complex. and then as you do more and more and you see more and more, you can add more and more to those layers, and then eventually you can be at a point where you are taking on those free rolls. You know?
Yeah.
And it depends on where they come from. If you got a simple 5k runner, 10k runner, you don't have to maybe be complex. Whereas I might treat a marathon runner with a bit more in depth. So it's knowing somebody who just runs 3 times a week, 20 minutes park run. You don't have to be more complex on that. You know, just manage a volume, a decent program is enough. Whereas with a marathon runner, you're going to go in more complexity. So the level they're training and also the experience. So somebody who's done multiple marathons, you're going to really take that into account as well. The experience matters hugely. So it's not a homogeneous group. So not everybody needs to be in depth as well. So, there are a few people where you don't need to look at the gait analysis. You can just do that. Just because we have a look. But sometimes it's a great reassurance for the patient as well. So they feel like it's good. It's like they've been validated. And it sort of improves their compliance as well. Nearly all my runners love to be videoed and shown how they do. It's just a human nature, isn't it?
I'll video most. Will probably only change the running styles of maybe 30% or something like that, if that. So a lot of the time you're just looking. Okay, is that relevant? Maybe not. And then, but again, anything. There's a big drive towards just hands off everything exercise in physio at the moment with everyone, isn't it? But anything that can improve the compliance to them doing your exercises, it's got to be useful in my eyes as well. There's a massive benefit to that. If you're saying, oh, that looks like this could benefit from a bit of strength exercises here and there, they're 100% going to buy into that, as opposed to just your opinion.
Definitely. Awesome. So obviously you do the courses for other physios and stuff. So where would people go if they want to get involved in the courses? Or
so we're doing quite a bit of courses. We're covering about 10 countries this year. So we're doing. I think next one is South Africa. I think we're doing running course Johannesburg and Cape Town. I think we're going to Dublin. We have to check our diaries. So I think all the details are on Function to Fitness /courses. So I think the key thing which we try to bring on our courses is having a systematic approach to dealing with complex multifactorial running injuries, and also encompass the whole interventions, starting from simple rehab exercises to strength and conditioning, taking them all the way to power exercise, plyometrics, dynamic mobility, and finally, like the icing on the cake, is gait analysis. So that definitely has a role. So it's a lot of skills which we go through. That's why it takes 2 days. So that's something who wants to take. It's like a journey, isn't it? Starting from the initial injury and getting them back. And runners quickly forget how bad they were initially. When they talk about performance and things like that. So we've been doing it for 6 years and it's going from strength to strength. And we hope to see you over there.
Thanks. Thanks, guys.
Really good, isn't it?
Love it.
How many minutes was it?
32.